A dream wedding, a perfect couple, and a room full of guests ready to celebrate, until one shocking discovery turned it all into a nightmare. By the end of the night, the bride was in tears, the groom had vanished, and the entire wedding was cancelled in disgrace. Hey, I'm Daniel, a primary school teacher with a pretty structured routine. My workdays are predictable, with scheduled classes and meetings, including staff discussions every Tuesday that often run late, sometimes until 6 p.m. Because of that, I usually get home around 7 o'clock in the evening. My wife, Michelle, who's 31, is always wiped out on Tuesdays after her intense gym workouts, so I typically take care of dinner while she freshens up with a shower and tidies up small things around the house, like making the bed. But last Tuesday, our usual routine took an unexpected turn. The school director canceled our weekly staff meeting at the last minute due to an unplanned visit from the district inspector. With the evening suddenly free, I went back to my classroom to wrap up some grading and realized it was barely 3:30 p.m. Seeing an opportunity, I made a spontaneous decision to head home early. I thought it'd be a nice chance to surprise Michelle, cook dinner, take care of a few lingering chores, and maybe set up a cozy candlelit meal. Lately, she had been growing distant, and I hoped a warm, relaxed evening might bring us closer again. Our marriage had been through its fair share of struggles, mostly tied to financial stress. Over time, I had noticed Michelle becoming more controlling, wanting everything done on her terms. It led to tension, arguments, and this growing wall between us. Still, I held on, trying to be patient, believing things would work themselves out. That afternoon, I got home earlier than usual. I parked my car in the detached garage a little way from the house, something I'd started doing years ago when our kids were babies to keep the noise from waking them. Those peaceful naps were crucial not just for their health but for our sanity too. It gave us a few quiet moments to recharge. As I walked toward our two-story house, something caught my eye. Michelle's car was in the driveway. That was odd. On gym days, she usually left the car at home and took the bus. Pushing aside any concerns, I chalked it up to a change in plans and continued toward the back entrance, quietly slipping inside. I had always been handy around the house, so my mind was already on the small repairs and chores I could knock out before she got home. I took pride in keeping our home in perfect working order. Every door hinge oiled, every moving part functioning smoothly. The sound of slamming doors or creaky hinges had always irritated both of us, so I made sure they never became an issue. But as I stepped into the kitchen, something immediately caught my attention, pulling me away from my usual routine. Michelle's purse was sitting on the table. That was unusual. She was always particular about keeping it close, never leaving it unattended. Seeing it there unsettled me. I knew she'd be annoyed at herself for forgetting it. The sight made me pause, shifting my focus away from the cleaning I had planned. Then I noticed something else. On the floor near the kitchen counter, a pile of clothes lay in a haphazard heap, workout gear mostly, including a tight-fitting jumpsuit and a large towel. I frowned. Michelle was meticulous. She never left her gym clothes scattered like that. At that moment, faint noises drifted down from our bedroom upstairs. My first thought was that she might not be feeling well. Maybe she had cut her workout short and come home early to rest. Without hesitating, I began making my way up the carpeted stairs, each step careful and deliberate. Then I almost stumbled. A pair of men's shoes blocked my path. They weren't mine. A strange, sinking feeling spread through my chest. The shoes didn't match anything I owned. Not the slacks, the button-down shirts, or even the casual clothes I kept for weekends. With growing unease, I climbed the last few steps, and that's when I saw it. The hallway was in disarray. Scattered across the floor were pieces of clothing, underwear, socks, intertwined with Michelle's delicate, lacy lingerie, the kind she reserved for special occasions. Anniversaries. Celebrations. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, my body refused to move, my mind scrambling to process the chaotic scene before me. A lifetime of trust, love, and certainty in my marriage suddenly clashed with the undeniable evidence in front of me. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart pounded, then faltered like it had forgotten how to beat. I had to sit down on the stairs, gripping the railing for support as an overwhelming rush of emotions swirled inside me. Shock, disbelief, confusion. And then anger. A kind of anger I had never known before. I had always been the calm one. As a teacher, I dealt with a classroom full of energetic kids every day, keeping my patience even in the most chaotic moments. But now that steady composure shattered. A surge of adrenaline shot through my veins, unfamiliar and raw. I barely recognized the emotions tearing through me. This wasn't just frustration. This was something deeper, something primal. And yet, despite it all, despite the storm raging inside me, I stayed frozen in place trying to grasp what came next. I struggled to steady my breathing, desperate to stay composed as I climbed the stairs. My heart pounded, my steps slow and deliberate, each one quieter than the last. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, or dreading to confirm, but some dark, anxious part of me needed to see it for myself. At the top of the stairs, my path led me to an unusual passageway, a walk-in closet that connected both the bedroom and the bathroom. Moving through the dimly lit bathroom, I emerged at the threshold of a spacious dressing room, which seamlessly opened into our bedroom. That was when I saw it. Through the slightly ajar bedroom door, positioned at just the right angle, my eyes landed on the bed. And then I froze. It was as if I had been unwillingly thrust into the middle of a disturbing real-life scene, something out of a film I never wanted to witness. I couldn't look away even though every fiber of my being screamed for me to stop. The room was filled with the unmistakable sounds of passion, moans and breathless gasps, the kind that once belonged to moments shared between Michelle and me. But now they were coming from her, with someone else. A wave of nausea churned in my stomach. My hands shook but my instincts took over. I reached for my phone, compelled to capture this cruel reality, to ensure I wouldn't later convince myself it had been some twisted nightmare. I needed proof, undeniable, inescapable proof, of the betrayal unfolding before me. Through the screen, I watched the woman I had loved for years, the mother of our children, my wife, my partner, wrapped in the arms of another man. Michelle. The same woman who had once whispered promises of forever. The same woman who had built a life with me, who had stood beside me through hardships, who had convinced me time and again that we were unbreakable. And yet, here she was, breaking me in the most profound way imaginable. I suddenly couldn't bear it any longer. My chest tightened as a suffocating weight crushed me from the inside. Without thinking, I stopped recording, turned on my heel, and quietly made my way back down the stairs. I stepped outside, gulping down the cool evening air as though it might somehow wash away what I had just seen. But nothing could cleanse this moment from my mind. My feet carried me aimlessly, my thoughts a chaotic blur, until I found myself in a park miles from home. I sat down on a worn wooden bench, rubbing my hands over my face, willing myself to wake up from this nightmare. But it wasn't a dream. It was my life, unraveling before me in real time. My phone buzzed. Michelle. I hesitated before answering, my voice a hollow echo of itself. Don't worry, I forced out. I'll be fine. I didn't know if that was true, but I couldn't let her hear the fracture in my voice. I'm going to sleep in the spare room for now, I added, my tone flat. I just need time. Without waiting for a response, I hung up and headed toward the guest room on the ground floor. The next few days blurred together. Michelle carried on as if nothing had changed, her demeanor eerily unshaken. Meanwhile, I functioned on autopilot, going through the motions of life while keeping my distance, avoiding her whenever possible. But I knew I couldn't hide forever. No excuse, no distraction, no temporary retreat to a separate room could shield me from the inevitable. At some point I would have to face her. And when I did, there would be no going back. I returned to our bedroom, but Michelle carried on with her usual routine, completely unaware of my presence. She moved through the house with ease as if everything was perfectly normal, like she had no reason to suspect that her world or mine had just shattered. The dishwasher hummed in the kitchen, the vacuum roared through the living room, dusting and tidying followed in rhythmic succession. It was all so painfully routine. Around 11:30, Michelle made her way upstairs. I heard the shower running, followed by silence, then the sound of the toilet flushing. 45 minutes later, she came back down, casually leaving the front door slightly ajar as she stepped outside. It was clear. She wasn't worried. She wasn't expecting any confrontation. She had absolute confidence that everything would continue as usual, that the structure of our lives would keep me from questioning, from acting, from fighting back. But something inside me had changed. I knew, with gut-wrenching certainty, that nothing between us could ever be the same again. From this moment forward, intimacy with Michelle would feel tainted, impossible to enjoy without the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. And worse, I saw no sign that she had taken any precautions, no evidence of protection used during her affair. That thought disturbed me more than I could put into words. Our sex life had dwindled in recent months, and I had foolishly attributed it to stress, routine, or the natural ebb and flow of marriage. But now I was forced to ask myself a far darker question. Who else was she exposing me to? What risks had she brought into our home without a second thought? That night, sleep refused to come. My mind raced with fragments of conversations, past arguments, little inconsistencies that had once seemed harmless but now stood out like neon signs. I had to know more. It was around this time that I became more curious about Michelle's gym. She had recently joined a private fitness group, and I had been largely indifferent to it, until now. She had always described it as a tight-knit community of married women, one where men weren't exactly welcomed. It had sounded like a weak excuse at the time, a convenient way to keep me out of that part of her life. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to see it for myself. So the following Thursday I pushed my way in. I showed up at the gym, determined to observe firsthand whatever it was she had been so adamant about keeping me from. The moment I stepped inside, it felt like I had walked into a saloon where someone had ordered milk. Every set of eyes turned toward me. Conversations fell into hushed murmurs. It was clear I wasn't exactly a welcomed guest. Then, among the gathered faces, I noticed someone who stood out. Elizabeth. She was striking, exceptionally fit, exuding the kind of confidence that instantly commanded attention. She wasn't just another gym member, she was the director and owner of the establishment. My eyes drifted toward her profile on the club's information board, where her contact number was listed alongside her working hours. But it wasn't her that made my stomach drop. Beneath her photo there were 3 more names, each accompanied by a picture. 2 women. And 1 man. I stared at the face in disbelief. It was him. Michelle's lover. The man who, with her full consent, had invaded the space that was supposed to belong to us. My hands clenched into fists as I realized what this meant. Not only had she built a life separate from me, but she had done it right under my nose. This wasn't some reckless one-time mistake. It was calculated, woven into her routine, seamlessly blending into her everyday existence. Curiosity battled with rage. I needed to know more. And if Michelle had spent months, maybe years, hiding the truth from me, then I was prepared to uncover it myself. I muttered, "Let's go," trying to keep my voice steady. Michelle didn't hesitate. She quickly gathered her towel and purse from the designated storage area where all the gym members kept their belongings. She was in a hurry, almost too eager to leave, as if she was trying to outrun something. But before we could make it out the door, a woman I didn't recognize approached Michelle, catching her off guard. "What a shame Phil couldn't finish today like he usually does," the woman commented casually. Michelle stiffened for a split second before nodding in agreement. Her response was clipped, and I could see the tension in her body. Phil. The name stuck with me as we walked out. That night, I tried to push everything aside, tried to convince myself that maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed. But that fragile illusion didn't last long. The following week I was assigned school pickup duty. For those unfamiliar, it's where teachers supervise the chaotic after-school car line. Kids eager to get home, waving goodbye to friends, frantically searching for their parents while parents, in turn, attempt to keep their patience as they inch forward in an endless row of vehicles. It's a thankless task, but that day something unexpected happened. A student, Timothy, a bright kid in my class, hopped into his car, chatting away with the ease that only children have. His words were innocent, offhand, but they sent a chill down my spine. "My mom trains with this guy. His name is Bounty or something like that," he said, recalling a conversation from home. "He works at the gym nearby. He even does private lessons for people at their houses." My stomach tightened. Timothy kept talking, unaware that his words were hitting me like bricks. "She trains with him every Friday night," he continued. "When she comes home, she looks really happy and relaxed." I swallowed hard. "It's nice," he added cheerfully. "She doesn't cook on Fridays though, so we usually get takeout." The pieces were clicking into place, one after another, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Phil. Bounty. A gym trainer who made my wife feel radiant after their weekly sessions. I felt like a detective piecing together a case I had never wanted to solve. My mind raced through details I had overlooked. Michelle's distant behavior, the sudden changes in her schedule, the subtle yet persistent shift in our dynamic. At the same time, I had my own responsibilities to juggle. Questions about bills and finances had been nagging at me. When were the utilities due? Which account was used for which payment? I had always trusted Michelle to handle these things, but now I felt an urge to see for myself. So I did. And what I found shocked me. Our mortgage debt? Almost completely paid off. My retirement account? Sitting at an impressive $900,000. Far more than I had expected. It should have been a relief, a reason to celebrate. But instead it left me uneasy. How had I been so unaware of what was happening right under my nose? And while I was uncovering these financial surprises, Michelle continued her Thursday night sessions, with someone named Bonnie. At this point, I no longer knew what to believe. But one thing was certain, My marriage was built on secrets. And I wasn't sure how much more of them I could take. I stopped trying. There was no point in making an effort to maintain a romantic relationship with Michelle anymore. Instead, we simply coexisted, two people living under the same roof, moving around each other like distant acquaintances rather than husband and wife. Without a word, I began shifting my personal belongings out of our shared spaces. One by one, my things disappeared, packed away into boxes that I stored in the garage. Michelle rarely ventured in there, so the quiet rearrangement went unnoticed. When she finally did realize that some of my things were missing and questioned me about it, I shrugged it off, giving her vague answers. But there was one moment, one conversation, that I knew would stay with me forever. It happened, fittingly, during my usual after-school duty, overseeing the student pickup area. The last of the children had already left, except for one, Timothy, Michelle's son. I waited with him, anticipating her arrival. When she finally showed up, I noticed it immediately: her red, swollen eyes, the slight tremble in her hands, the way she avoided my gaze. Teachers are trained to pick up on these subtle cues. Small details can reveal so much about what's happening in a child's home. And in this case, it wasn't just about Timothy. It was about her. She hesitated before speaking, her voice strained. "He really is something else," she murmured almost to herself. Then, taking a deep breath, she continued, "A week ago, everything was just normal. He would come to me every Friday, always at 12:30. I felt my jaw tighten. Don't get me wrong," she added, her expression distant. "He was truly skilled. A master at what he does. He knew exactly how to ignite every part of me." She trailed off, her gaze shifting skyward, as if she were reliving those moments in her mind. I looked up too. But for a very different reason. Her memories were filled with passion. Mine with bitterness. Michelle's words only confirmed what I had already known, but hearing them out loud in such a detached and wistful tone solidified something inside me. She finally sighed, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "I have to face the consequences," she muttered, as if trying to convince herself. "And they won't be easy." Then, snapping back to reality, she called out to Timothy, signaling that it was time to leave. I remained seated, staring into the distance, my thoughts tangled in a web of betrayal, anger, and something I hadn't expected: relief. Michelle's confession made me realize something. My desire for revenge wasn't really about her. It was about me. It was the bitterness of a man who had watched his marriage crumble. The frustration of being lied to. The humiliation of being the last to know. But now I was starting to see a bigger picture. I found myself wondering how many other women from that gym had been involved with this man. And more importantly, who else was he seeing? It wasn't long before my curiosity turned into a quiet obsession. Determined to uncover the full truth, I adjusted my daily routine. My evening walks gradually became earlier and earlier, time to observe his whereabouts. I noted when he came and went, whom he spoke to, and how often Michelle's gym friends seemed to cross paths with him. But that wasn't enough. Eventually, I took an entire week off work, dedicating all my time to tracking his movements. And I didn't stop there. At a small electronics store, I discreetly purchased a long-range listening device. One designed to blend in, to look like something ordinary. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would draw attention. Because if I was going to find out the whole truth, I needed to hear it for myself. I purchased everything I needed. The facility where clients underwent individual health assessments was often used by Bonnie for his more private activities. As I reflected on my actions, I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of person had I become? I was placing cameras in hidden locations. I was spying. I was gathering evidence like a man consumed by obsession. Where would all of this lead? By Wednesday, I had made up my mind. I waited patiently until Michelle left for her usual grocery run, then quietly installed the third and fourth cameras. One in our bedroom, another in the living room. Later that evening, I reviewed the footage. It didn't take long for my worst suspicions to be confirmed. Bonnie had been involved with multiple women, dozens, maybe more. Each encounter, each betrayal, each moment of deceit unfolded on my screen like a sickening parade of broken vows. But what horrified me most? Michelle's name was on the list. I nearly tore myself away from the house that night. In fact, I had already begun to detach myself from it entirely. I hesitated to call it a home anymore because, in truth, it had lost all sentimental value. It was just a building now, a place filled with lies. Michelle had even commented recently about how empty the house had felt. I had given her a casual excuse, telling her I was simply getting rid of unnecessary things. What I didn't say was that I was preparing for my exit. But before I left, I had unfinished business. To ensure confidentiality, I ditched my old phone, erasing any trace of my investigations. Then, I put together a special collection of gifts, for every husband or partner connected to the women Bonnie had been involved with. Each package contained damning evidence. Locations where he had been with their wives. His full name and address. Even details about his reckless disregard for protection during his affairs. I also included the address of a local intimate health clinic, for those who might need it. The fallout was swift. Within days, chaos erupted. A man resembling Bonnie was found beaten in an alleyway in the city center, allegedly attacked by a group of unknown assailants. The number of divorce filings at the local courthouse skyrocketed. Houses were suddenly being listed for sale at an unusual rate. And then there was Michelle. One fateful afternoon she returned home, only to find my parting gift waiting for her. The moment she saw it, she screamed. A piercing, guttural sound that sent the neighbors rushing to check on her. Terrified, she collapsed to the floor. An elderly neighbor, a sharp and observant woman in her 70s, was the first to see her lying there. At first, she hadn't thought much of the commotion, but then as Michelle's cries turned into uncontrollable sobs, she realized something was terribly wrong. Michelle never truly recovered from that day. She spiraled into a deep depression. Our children, disgusted by her actions, distanced themselves from her, just as I did. Now, I live alone in a small house, free from the weight of betrayal. I still can't forgive my ex-wife, and I don't think I ever will. I often say that the fastest way to heal from heartbreak is to dive into a new relationship. Physically, emotionally, whatever works. I had always believed in that theory, but I never expected to see it tested so dramatically in real life. It all started when my closest friend, let's call him Greg, discovered that his fiancée had cheated on him. And not just at any point in their relationship, but on their wedding day. In the dressing room. With another man. That morning, Greg had woken up with excitement, thinking he was about to start the happiest chapter of his life. Instead, he ended up blindsided by betrayal. But to understand the full weight of this story, we need to go back a little further. Greg had always been a rock of support for our friend group, the type of guy who was always there when you needed him. He had known Sarah, his fiancée, long before she had ever gone on a romantic trip with her ex, a guy named Jake. But despite their history, Greg had never been the jealous type. In fact, he had encouraged Sarah's relationship with Jake at the time, believing that love should unfold naturally without interference. During college, I ended up rooming with Jake for a semester, which meant Sarah and Greg were constantly around. Over time, their presence became so routine that we barely noticed their frequent visits anymore. When Sarah and Jake eventually broke up, Greg was still there, supportive, understanding, and patient. And when they finally became a couple, no one was surprised. Fast forward to the present. Greg had fully embraced his role as the devoted fiancé. He understood how important this day was to Sarah and spared no expense in making it truly unforgettable. But there was one issue that kept surfacing. The wedding budget. Sarah had insisted on a $50,000 wedding. A grand event, overflowing with guests, extravagant decorations, and a venue that looked like it belonged in a royal estate. Greg, on the other hand, had always been a practical guy. If it were up to him, he would have preferred something more intimate, a modest $10,000 wedding with close friends and family. But Sarah wouldn't hear of it. Her determination was unwavering. And looking back, maybe that should have been a red flag. The night before the wedding, Greg had felt uneasy. But nothing could have prepared him for what would happen next. The morning of the wedding, the venue was buzzing with activity. Bridesmaids, makeup artists, wedding coordinators, everyone was in motion, ensuring that everything went off without a hitch. Then, suddenly, a wave of murmurs spread through the crowd, the energy shifting into something tense and uncertain. Intrigued by the commotion, I turned to see what was happening. And that's when I saw her, Sarah. Surrounded by bridesmaids and event organizers, all desperately trying to comfort her as she sobbed uncontrollably. Something had gone terribly wrong. And within minutes, the devastating truth unraveled before us all. Sensing the tension in the air, I hurried toward the commotion, eager to understand what was going on. But before I could get close, one of Sarah's bridesmaids stepped in my way. "Everything is under control," she assured me, her voice steady but her expression uneasy. I was advised to step away, to retreat to another room and wait patiently. But something about the situation felt off. The wedding organizers were unusually insistent, subtly trying to steer me away from the growing scene. I ignored them. Determined, I pushed forward. Sarah was inside the bridal suite, her makeup half finished, but something was wrong, deeply wrong. Her anxiety was visible, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped at her face. Surprisingly, it was Greg who had been helping her with her makeup, gently dabbing at her foundation as if trying to soothe her distress. Maybe that explained why they had been spending so much time together. Why he had been accompanying her to the gym so often. But this wasn't the time for speculation. At that moment, completely unaware of the turmoil unfolding, Jake's younger sister walked past the hallway, searching for something. She suddenly remembered, she had left an important item in her bag which was still inside the bridal suite. Without hesitation she turned back, heading toward the room to retrieve it. The door was unlocked. She stepped inside. And then she froze. Horror and disbelief flooded her face as her gaze landed on the bed. Sarah and Greg. Entangled. Consumed by each other in a way that left no room for doubt. Her gasp must have given her away because Sarah turned, her eyes widening in shock. But it was too late. The secret was out. The revelation spread like wildfire. Somehow Jake heard the whispers first. The murmurs, the shifting glances, the tension hanging in the air like smoke before a fire. His body tensed, a sense of unease creeping up his spine. And then, without hesitation, he threw open the door to the bridal suite. There she was, Sarah. Crumpled in the corner, mascara-streaked tears rolling down her cheeks. The weight of guilt hung heavy on her shoulders as she begged for forgiveness. Jake's face twisted with rage, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. How long? He demanded, his voice shaking with fury. How long has this been going on? Sarah sobbed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. It was a mistake, she whispered. It just happened. But Jake wasn't listening anymore. His fury erupted in an uncontrollable wave, his voice rising in a deafening roar. Then suddenly, he turned and stormed out, his entire body shaking with unfiltered rage. The guests, already on edge, rushed after him as chaos erupted in the venue. The wedding, the celebration, the carefully curated illusion of perfection. All of it was crumbling. And as I stood there, watching the guests scatter like a building engulfed in flames, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. As I stood amidst the chaos, I was struck by just how significant this wedding had been. The guest list wasn't just made up of close family and friends, it spanned generations of relatives, colleagues, and longtime acquaintances. It was meant to be a celebration that brought people together. Instead, it had become a spectacle of betrayal. A wave of sadness washed over me as I observed the aftermath. Many guests stood in small groups, murmuring among themselves, their once excited chatter now replaced with hushed, uneasy conversations. Others, unwilling to linger in the tension, quietly decided to leave, heading for the exit with disappointed expressions. Sam's sister and brother made their way toward us, taking seats in the front row. They looked shaken, still processing the disaster that had just unfolded. After a brief exchange with their father, Sam's family huddled together, trying to determine what to do next. And then came the inevitable announcement. The wedding was officially canceled. The $50,000 that had been poured into this event was gone, wasted. The dream ceremony Sarah had fought so hard for had collapsed in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. But the real shock of the night was yet to come. In an utterly unexpected turn of events, Greg, who had always been known as Sarah's supportive best friend, made a bold confession. He no longer considered himself gay. And not only that, he and Sarah were now in a romantic relationship. Gasps echoed across the room. The revelation sent shockwaves through the remaining guests, particularly Sarah's parents, who were so appalled by the news that they disowned her on the spot. The fallout was immediate. Looking back, it's strange to think about how everything unraveled. In a way, it's both tragic and absurd, watching what had once seemed like a picture-perfect relationship fall apart so spectacularly. And in the end, the truth about Sam and Sarah's relationship, the one everyone had believed in, turned out to be nothing but an illusion.